Welcome to another episode of China Update, where I provide you with the most up-to-date political, economic, and geostrategic analysis on the world's number 2 economy. My name is Tony. Let's jump in. Okay, happy Wednesday, everybody. Yesterday, Tuesday, the supreme policy-making body, the 24-member Politburo, met for its April meeting, with the focus of the meeting being the current economic situation. It also decided that the important third plenum, made up of the party's top 370 or so officials, will meet in July, and the main agenda will include, quote, studying further comprehensive deepening of reforms and advancing Chinese-style modernization, end quote. The readout for the meeting came out after markets had closed on Tuesday in the PRC and on the eve of 5 days of vacation for China's Labor Day holidays. In a sign of how concerned leadership is, the Politburo readout signaled that much more economic stimulus is on the way, including more measures to stabilize the real estate market and more fiscal and monetary support. Specifically, the policymakers said efforts should be made to implement a proactive fiscal policy and a prudent monetary policy, making good use of ultra-long special sovereign bonds and accelerating the use of local government special purpose bonds. In terms of risk resolution, they vowed to, quote, study policies for reducing existing housing stock while optimizing new housing supply, end quote, and to establish a new model for real estate development. Housing projects must be completed to protect the legitimate rights of home buyers, the meeting said. Chinese financial media outlet Yitai pointed out that the meeting also highlighted the need for local governments identified as high risk in terms of their debt burdens to resolve debt effectively without compromising their stable economic development. In addition, continued efforts should be made to tackle risks faced by small and mid-sized financial institutions. The readout expressed, quote, the economy faces other hurdles such as weak domestic demand, weak consumption, and poor performance in the corporate sector, end quote. So we note that this is the Politburo itself making this appraisal of the economy. The US-based Wall Street Journal writes that some economists viewed the Politburo's statement as a signal that officials intend to broadly stick with the measured approach to stimulate the economic management that has characterized their response for the past 2 years, in contrast to the much broader moves of earlier eras. In particular, the outlet adds, Beijing has shown a reluctance to decisively shift China's economy away from investment as an engine of growth and toward greater consumption, which officials view as potentially wasteful and at odds with their goal of remaking China as a technological and manufacturing powerhouse. The readout repeated key elements of the party's economic pronouncements in recent months, suggesting that Beijing will largely stay the course with current policies. Others disagree, however. Julian Evans-Pritchard, head of China economics at Capital Economics, expressed in a note, quote, this seems to acknowledge that the current policy approach is failing to bring the housing market back into balance and that a new strategy is needed, end quote. And with the Politburo meeting covered, let's now turn to the economy generally. Yesterday, Tuesday, saw the publication of the Caixin China General Manufacturing Purchasing Managers Index, PMI, which seeks to give an independent snapshot of the manufacturing sector. Manufacturing is, of course, very important to the economy. It accounted for 27% of China's GDP in the first quarter. According to this new report, activity in China's manufacturing sector expanded at the fastest pace in 14 months in April. The index came in at 51.4 in April, up 0.3 points from the previous month. A reading above 50 signals an expansion in activity, while a number below that indicates a contraction. While we're here, we note too that the country's official manufacturing purchasing managers index expanded for a second straight month in April, but at a slower pace. This data was released yesterday, Tuesday. The headline reading fell to 50.4 in April from 50.8 in March, but still bet a forecast of 50.2 by a Wall Street Journal poll of economists. Wang Zhe, the senior economist at Caixin Inside Group behind the report, expressed on the findings, quote, the strong start to the year is consistent with the Caixin manufacturing PMI, which has remained in expansionary territory for 6 straight months. Overall, in April, the manufacturing sector continued to improve, with accelerated expansion in supply and demand, sweetened by exceptional performance in overseas demand, end quote. However, this shouldn't be surprising. Regular viewers know that public capital has moved from
housing and infrastructure to manufacturing in recent months to maintain growth. Demand remains very weak, and China's drawn-out real estate crisis has shown no signs of abating. Indeed, new home sales from China's 100 largest real estate developers continued their steep decline in April, according to private data from China Real Estate Information Corp. New home sales from the top 100 developers reached 43 billion for the month, 45% lower compared with the same month last year. Sales were down 13% compared with March, and about 20% of the figure recorded in December 2020, right before the housing crisis began. Former real estate giant China Evergrande Group has received a liquidation order. Country Garden Holdings Co. is facing the same risks, and now even high-profile state-backed China Vanke Co. is facing liquidation problems. Property investment has slumped 9.5% in the first quarter, and the housing crisis looks to enter a fourth year. Yesterday, we discussed major Chinese cities removing all of their purchase restrictions in a hope to stimulate demand. Since then, in the last 24 hours, Beijing itself, the capital and a first-tier city, has also begun removing restrictions. Beijing will allow families to buy one more home in non-core areas of the city. According to a statement from the city's Housing Commission, households that reach current home ownership limits will be allowed to purchase one outside the Fifth Ring Road. The relaxation comes after Beijing in September reduced down payment ratios and eased the threshold for some types of housing to qualify for lower mortgages. It also scrapped a rule banning divorced couples from buying new homes in the capital if they owned more units than allowed. The massive port city an hour from Beijing, Tianjin, also relaxed restrictions this week on purchases of homes larger than 120 square meters. Okay, that is the economy. Next up, we move to Taiwan. If you're enjoying today's episode of China Update, I have a huge favor to ask. That is just to like and subscribe. It's just 2 clicks of the mouse, but it's a huge help for the channel growing. Patreon and Buy Me a Coffee links are also in the description below for anyone who wants to help keep the channel financially sustainable. I rely on this to keep the channel going. Thank you so much, everybody, for the ongoing support. Finally, for today, this week, the German Marshall Fund of the US published a new report with the provocative title of Exposing the PRC's Distortion of UN General Assembly Resolution 2758 to press its claim over Taiwan. The report argues that the People's Republic of China's strategy for pressing its claim that Taiwan is part of China as a matter of international law is based on flawed legal assumptions and arguments. We will end today's video by examining some of the report, which we are now quoting selected excerpts from directly. The People's Republic of China's strategy for pressing its claim that Taiwan is a part of China with no independent status increasingly relies on a claim that UN General Assembly Resolution 2758 establishes as a matter of international law the PRC's One China principle. This assertion is based on flawed legal assumptions and arguments. The PRC's agenda has benefited from its sustained pressure and influence on UN entities and officials, a pattern of misinterpretation, acquiescence, and misunderstanding by those entities and officials, limited pushback from the United States, Taiwan's diplomatic allies, and other states, especially in high-profile forums, and structural features of the UN, including its one state, one vote format, and the low salience of Taiwan issues for many members. The PRC's account mischaracterizes the contents of Resolution 2758 and ignores the limits to the UN's powers to make international law. Still, Beijing's position has made apparent gains in the UN in 3 areas. UN requirements that references to Taiwan use the nomenclature Taiwan Province of China, UN statements that Taiwan is an integral part or part of China, and misconstruing UN statements concerning recognition of the PRC as indicating Taiwan's lack of international legal status. If Beijing wins acceptance of its position, it could more credibly claim that the use of force or coercion to achieve unification of Taiwan would be lawful. The PRC could also more plausibly argue that some, but not all measures by the United States and others to prevent or deter such an outcome would be unlawful. Acceptance of the PRC's views of Resolution 2758 also would weaken the UN's integrity and increase the challenges facing the rules-based international order. Here ends the direct quote. The report then makes several policy recommendations for the US and her allies, namely 1. Coordinate efforts by the United States, Taiwan's diplomatic allies, and other like-minded UN member states, and exploit their diverse advantages and collective impact to counter the influence of the PRC and states that support its position on Resolution 2758 and related matters. 2. Clarify that the US One China policy is not the same as Beijing's One China principle and encourage other countries to do the same. It's important that we actually stop with the report and quickly unpack here the difference between the US One China policy and Beijing's One China principle. This is actually quite a big topic, so we can only briefly unpack some of it here. But it's worth noting that the United States recognizes the PRC as the sole legal government of China, but only acknowledges the Chinese position that Taiwan is part of China. The US does not recognize PRC sovereignty over Taiwan, nor does it recognize Taiwan as a sovereign country, and considers this question unsettled. Thus, the United States maintains formal relations with the PRC and has unofficial relations with Taiwan. This is the language of the English versions of the 3 US PRC joint communiques, the foundation for diplomatic recognition between the two countries. The PRC changed the word acknowledge to recognize in the Mandarin version of the documents, but the US maintains that it is bound by the English version of these documents. The other big player in the region, of course, is Japan, and the Japanese One China policy is similar. The 1972 Japan-China Joint Communique entered into as the basis of diplomatic normalization in Sino-Japanese relations, states that the government of Japan, quote, fully understands and respects the stance of the government of the People's Republic of China that Taiwan is a part of the territory of the People's Republic of China, end quote. So again, the Japanese do not recognize PRC sovereignty over Taiwan, only acknowledge Beijing's position, nor do they recognize Taiwan as a sovereign state. It is an ambiguity of convenience to establish diplomatic relations at the height of the Cold War, when the Western alliance was seeking to turn China against the Soviet Union. Of course, now the Soviet Union, or Russia, is no longer the biggest rival to the Western alliance, but rather China. That is today's episode of China Update. Let me know what you think about some of these developments, especially the Taiwan Report, which we've just covered. Thank you, everybody, for watching today's episode of China Update. Have a great Wednesday, and I will see you all tomorrow.